前我们要牢牢把握世界多极化、经济全球化大势。
On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, Asian leaders descend on Bishkek for the SCO summit. How can they maintain security over the Eurasian landmass? And U.S. trade hawks opt to decouple the Chinese and U.S. economies. Can the world's biggest economies end this trade brinkmanship?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, has wrapped up its 2019 summit in the Kyrgyz capital Bishkek. Chinese President Xi Jinping called for member states to build a closer community with a shared future. The leaders attending the summit issue a joint communique aiming to boost the cooperation in diverse fields, including security, trade, agriculture, you name it. Before we turn to our panelists about what is the difference this meeting will make, take a look at this first.
A gathering of 12 leaders in Bishkek to address security, regional development, and global governance. Some major tasks of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. President Xi says despite global uncertainties, the trend of peace, development, and win-win cooperation will remain unchanged. He has called for the SCO to be built into an organization that's not only united and inclusive, but also enjoys mutual trust while securing mutual benefits. It also includes facilitating trade in the region by taking advantage of the Belt and Road Initiative.
We should advocate and maintain the multilateral trade mechanism, jointly build an open global economy. We need to promote policy-making to facilitate the free and convenient flow of trade and investment. We can utilize cooperative platforms like China International Import-Expo to boost the openness, exchange, and integration of regional economy.
This year's summit is held amid fierce security challenges in the region. One of SCO's dialogue partners, Sri Lanka, suffered a series of terrorist attacks in April. In 2018, over 360 crimes relating to terrorism and extremism were suppressed.
We need to uphold a security concept that is common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable. We need to continue to enhance the legal basis for security cooperation between members, enhance information sharing and joint operations. We should take comprehensive measures to fight terrorism, separatism, and extremism, boost security, and prevent the return of extremist forces.
Given the danger of terrorism from Afghanistan, a roadmap titled Further Action of the SCO Afghanistan Contact Group was signed. A communique after the summit says the SCO is devoted to building a new type of international relations and building a shared future for mankind. Members will work on politics, security, and deepen economic cooperation.
For more on the SCO summit, we have in Moscow Alexander Lukin, Professor and Director of East Asian and SCO Studies from the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Good to see you, Professor, once again after the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Good to see you. In New Delhi, India, we have retired Major General Deepankar Banerjee, Senior Strategic Consultant and former Director and Head of the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. Good to see you as well, sir. And in our Beijing studio, Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies from the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. I want to start with you, Professor Lukin. You and I were talking about it, the China-Russia relations during the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, after Chinese President's state visit to Moscow. So, Professor Lukin, how is the tangle between Moscow and Beijing making a sense within the framework of SCO now?
Well, Russia and China were, of course, among the founders of SCO. There used to be 6 countries, founding countries, but China and Russia are the strongest and the largest ones. So, of course, they had kind of promoted all the ideas, original ideas of SCO. And this is the cooperation in security sphere, in economics, and in humanitarian or cultural sphere. But now it's very important that a year ago the organization was also joined by two more big countries, India and Pakistan.
Sure.
India is a larger one. So it's not just an organization now, as some claimed before, dominated by Russia and China. India is also a big country, and I think it's a positive step because it unites now like the major powers of, I would say, non-Western world. It doesn't mean that it's anti-Western, but it shares major values and ideas about the multipolar world, about pluralistic system of which should be created in the world.
Yes.
Which is very important in contemporary situation where some countries try to dominate in the world.
Now, earlier we've seen some footages coming from those participating in the SCO summit, coming from Iran, from India, Pakistan, and certainly China, Russia. Professor Cui, I want to go to you. Even though, as Mr. Lukin argued, that it is multipolar also within the SCO as well, with India, Pakistan joining, and some of the other players. But China-Russia's tangle extremely important from the very beginning of this mechanism. So, Mr. Cui, now with the trade war China apparently is having with the United States, and Russia, its relations with the quote-unquote the West and not necessarily warming up, what are the two countries looking for in each other, within SCO particularly, Mr. Cui?
I think now the situation, yes, I think both China and Russia, we should take consideration about some, not only a regional situation and also global issues, global situation. Indeed, but both China and Russia, we are facing some, pressures from United States, maybe in a different way, different approach. But I think now, yes, it's also a critical time for SCO. So that's the reason why President Xi stressed this solidarity for all of the members of the SCO, and also try to find out the, some new fields and some new areas, especially in economic cooperation, energy, and everything. So yes, I think to take use of the SCO, both China, Russia, and other members, and they can find out maybe some capability to deal with any challenge, not only from United States and also from this uncertainty and instability at a regional and a global level.
Common political aspiration, Professor Lukin, many wonder, has to be based on something concrete. Of course, Belt and Road Initiative, China initiated together with others to build a platform, together with the Eurasian Economic Community or Union, as you name it, from Russia, could be one of those areas both sides work on. But we've seen bilateral trade coming up, and yet exactly how to implement these two mechanisms when it comes to real cooperation, do we see much signs that this will translate into the fabrics of good relations within this framework?
Well, if you mean the SCO, not bilateral relations, so there are some things that SCO is doing better and some things it's doing worse. Well, the most important field and the most successful field, I would say, is security cooperation and anti-terrorist activities. Well, one should understand that SCO has no joint military forces as anti-terrorist forces, so it doesn't, as a group, take any actions against terrorist organizations. But there is a anti-terrorist structure which is working in a permanent organization, which is with its office in Tashkent. And what the countries are doing is that their special forces exchange information on terrorists there. They are kind of discussing this issue, and which is of course very important. And also they're compiling lists of terrorists. Also there are anti-terrorist annual military exercises in which all countries or several countries of SCO take part. So they kind of exchange their experience in that. So this is an important part. But unfortunately, economics is not a strong field within the SCO. So if you are talking about bilateral trade, for example, Russia and China, it's developing pretty well, but it has little to do with SCO as an organization.
Yes, so far, however, SCO has been having, since recent years, some common aspiration of developing all rounds of relationship, including about trade, including about other kinds of cooperation. That's why I want to go to you, Major General Banerjee, coming from India. I mean, we do not want to leave big players like India, Pakistan within the FCO alone, because you are playing another layer of bringing new momentum to the organization, but at the same time bringing new possibilities of a divided agenda, because there are things between the two countries that's happening. We all know that, some conflicts and challenges. Well, at the same time, there are different competing priorities when you have India and Pakistan joining the SCO compared to earlier times. So what do you make of it now? Major General, is it really streamlined well now, this time at least?
Yes. Let's be absolutely clear that Shanghai Cooperation Organization today is the largest and most significant regional cooperation organization in the world. In terms of the personnel involved, the population of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is more than half the total world population. Significant countries are involved in it. It is located in a very interesting and a conflict-prone region of the world, in the entire Asian region. And therefore, the success of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is an important factor for all of us. From India, we do not wish to bring the bilateral issues or problems with other neighbors into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. These issues India would like to resolve bilaterally, cooperatively, and with concessions and understanding, but based on pure practical measures of implementability as well as strong cooperation. What India would like to see in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is an emerging structure that will now set out for the rest of the world a new method of cooperation in all matters of peace, security, and development. And in that context, I would like to congratulate the participants at the summit now for this wonderful final communique at the end of the summit. I think this summarizes very clearly the tasks ahead and the challenges that the region has to face in order to deal with the conflicts of the world.
You could argue, Mr. Cui, that the SCO so far is incorporating more than half of the population of the world. After all, you have China, India, the biggest populous countries in the world joining, Pakistan, another big one. But on the other hand, how much impact will it really make as a result compared to its political aspirations? This is an interesting question, isn't it? A mechanism exists. Everybody congratulate that. But how much will the mechanism translate into real change? That's another issue.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, it's a very big challenge, I think. Faced by the SCO, how to deliver its commitment, how to transfer its mechanism and so many documents into actions, into concrete policies. So I think that's also a reason why this time in Bishkek, President Xi called for kind of to take more responsibility and to have some more implementation for any kind of documents, principles of SCO. So now, especially I think after its first enlargement, now it becomes a trans-regional organization. So I think which means that not only for the Central Asia, for China and Russia, especially in the background of uncertainty, I think for the world, it will give more, I think firstly not an opportunity, firstly it's a challenge for the SCO. It has to take some more responsibility. Otherwise, not only it will, limit its influence on some regional and global level, and also it could not, stop any negative impact from outside.
Right. Director General, Major General Banerjee, you've been seeing, analogies like if you make a plane, okay? You try to make a plane, manufacturing a plane, after years of working on it, you want it to take off, particularly at a time when you have problems on the ground. You want the plane to take off to do the rescue and other tasks. SCO, same. After years of building it, you want it to take off and be able to do and finish some of the important tasks that you just analyzed. But how much does it take to really take off? What are some of the challenges now, why it is still not yet up to the expectation, action-wise?
That's a very excellent question, and that is the most important challenge lying ahead of the SCO. But let us not also be disappointed. Organizations such as this, large regional cooperation organizations, cannot deliver results within just a very short period of time. And of course, India and Pakistan are members just about 2 years ago. And so therefore, these issues will take time, and we should be patient with that. But nevertheless, let me identify the immediate challenges that confront the SCO and perhaps largely the whole global community. There's today a change in the global order. Power shift is taking place from country to country, from region to region. The center of global activities will be more in the Asia-Pacific and in Asia rather than in Europe or elsewhere. And therefore, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will have a very important role. The immediate challenges, firstly, is of course the likely spread of the Islamic State, the global terrorist organization, from heart of Europe probably to Asia. And therefore, terrorism remains a significant challenge in front of the SCO. And there's an agreement among SCO members, but actions have to be taken to deal with terrorism.
Major General Banerjee, I have to come in and interrupt here, because all these challenges and sets of challenges, we've heard it over and over again. But the question really I ask is, what is preventing us from resolving some of these problems? What are some of the baby steps that can be taken? Now you have joint exercises, that's okay, that's great, but that's already happening for years. So what's the next step? So Professor Lukin, you have something more concrete for us?
Well, all this talk about ineffectiveness of organizations is kind of non-professional, I would say. The first, well, nothing is perfect in this world, and journalists always say that everything is imperfect. Well, the thing is that, well, let's take NATO. First NATO operation was in '99. So you can also ask, what did you do, people, for 50 years? But the fact that there is no war, there was no war before that, maybe it was a contribution by NATO. So a result of an organization work is not necessarily that something is happening, but that something is not happening. There is more security, perhaps, in this region because that Shanghai Cooperation Organization exists and works in a way that you don't see it. But at the same time, it does mean that we shouldn't criticize it. I often criticize it for example, for lack of economic cooperation.
I'm just asking what is preventing it from doing more, and what can be done now. It's not criticizing, it's thinking about it proactively.
Well, in economics, for example, the level of development of member states is very different. So some less developed countries are kind of apprehensive about more developed countries, so that's why they're afraid for their internal markets. So despite the fact that there is a goal in charter, an SCO charter, that SCO should aim at building a free trade zone, it is, well, some countries are still kind of not very keen on that. It's not Russia and China. Russia and China are talking about their own free trade zone, and also also members of Eurasian Economic Union.
Okay,
but there
all
are
these
smaller
could be
countries
understood,
within SCO.
it is only appropriate that we understood the circumstances as much as possible, but there's still an issue of delivery, and delivery is important at a time of dramatic change. Mr. Cui, your thoughts before we wrap it up.
I think it's very clear that, firstly, SCO needs to have some more ambition. I think that it could be one of the most important regional organization, not only the biggest one. And also, secondly, there could be some more integration and connectivity within SCO.
Like what?
For example, more infrastructure and more economic cooperation and more investment. Once there are a so-called community of common interests, certainly there will be a common requirements and a common consensus and a common responsibilities.
Right.
And the third is, I think that not only China and Russia, some other bigger members like India should also take some more responsibilities economically and also politically, strategically.
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation with the three of you, gentlemen, certainly to hear different perspectives and how to see the current realities. As once again, I want to emphasize here that is, we are not here to criticize anyone, but asking why and what can be done. And thank you so much for the three of you, your input. Alexander Lukin, Dipanka Banerjee, Cui Hongjian. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our live program. U.S. trade talks opt to decouple the Chinese and the U.S. economies. Can the world's biggest economies, though, and this trade brinkmanship? We're going to ask our panelists when we come back. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. Now, let's talk about China-U.S. trade tensions. Well, we have been talking about it for months so far. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter was awarded recently for his role in developing U.S.-China relations. He also spoke to President Donald Trump about China, but Trump stressed that he concerned about China becoming a superpower. However, Chinese leaders have repeatedly dismissed China's status as a superpower, no matter how far the country has come. Can the world's biggest economies find some common ground and to avoid real conflict? Before we go to our panelists from both China and the U.S., let's take a look at this first.
On Wednesday, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter was awarded the inaugural George H.W. Bush Award for statesmanship in U.S.-China relations, recognizing his role in establishing China-U.S. diplomatic ties more than 40 years ago. Recently, the former U.S. president also shared his experience in dealing with China with President Trump in a recent letter, saying the United States has spent trillions of dollars on wars in the past years, while China has invested in projects such as high-speed rails that benefit its people.
Well, let's look at what it means to be a superpower. Not just who has the most powerful military, but who is a champion of the finest things in life.
However, when commenting on the Chinese mobile giant Huawei, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence said the company represents a fundamental compromise to both U.S. national security and that of its allies. Pence backed the stance taken by the U.S. Commerce Department last month when it added Huawei to its list of entities that pose a risk to U.S. national security or foreign policy interests. Elsewhere, U.S. President Donald Trump recently said that China's economy has been seriously hurt by the tariffs. Both Huawei and the Chinese government have said the Trump administration is misleading the public. In fact, according to the latest official data, in the first 5 months of this year, China's actual use of foreign capital saw an increase of 3.7% year-on-year, and manufacturing utilization of foreign investment increased by 8.3%.
These data demonstrate the strong confidence of foreign investors in the Chinese economy and the Chinese market. China is still the most attractive investment hotspot in the world.
Some say the statesmanship the former presidents demonstrated in developing the U.S.-China ties should set an example for modern-day leaders.
For more on what's going on between China and the United States, in our Beijing studio, Huang Zhengyu, chairman of the Yu Capital and former White House fellow during the Obama years. Good to see you, sir. And also joining us in Beijing, Zhang Jianping, who is the Director General at the Center for Regional Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Good to see you as well. Joining us in Washington, D.C., long time no see, Jeffrey Shott, Senior Fellow working on international trade policy and economic sanctions at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I want to start with you, Mr. Shott. Long time no see. Good to see you once again, because we really cherish every frank American voice coming from the other parts of the world. Mr. Shott, you usually have a very fair attitude about what's going on between the two countries. Now help us to understand, are we already on the edge of something that should cause concern from both sides, Mr. Shott?
Well, it's good to see you again as well. When I was last on the program was the day that the talks broke down between the United States and China last month.
Exactly.
And since then, there has been, there's been a deepening divide since then between the United States and China, caused a lot by growing tensions in the high-tech area. This is troublesome. It should be a cause of concern for both countries. It is imposing costs on both countries because the tariff war is having an impact on investment. And even though you can cite stronger investment numbers in China, I suspect that some of that investment is less efficient than it should be and being put in redundant inventories or supply chains because of the disruptions due to the tariff war.
So you believe, Mr. Shott, we are probably in the danger of technological decoupling, or we are already at the very beginning of an apparent Cold War of some sort, as some being concerning about, Mr. Shott? What's your...
Well, certainly there is talk about more high-tech friction and decoupling. But as the United States looks into it more deeply and begins to implement the new laws that were promulgated last year to screen foreign investment in the United States and to increase restrictions on exports of technology, I think the U.S. Officials are seeing the complications in restricting technological trade in an era of globalization. It's a lot harder than it was during the Cold War with the Soviet Union.
Mr. Huang, though, we heard from even business communities in the U.S. talking about, what about the example of Huawei? In a way, it is diminishing the credibility of American companies providing components and parts to global businesses, because it shows once the American government says one thing, all the American business have to follow suit, no matter what the earlier contracts were. So it's destabilizing, in a way, the credibility of American companies. But having said that, though, will these voices still relevant and matter under the current political environment in Washington and probably even beyond?
Well, I think we have to realize that just a short few weeks ago, we were that close to getting an agreement signed.
I'm not sure whether we are that close or not. According to the media report,
President
yes,
Trump tweeted about inviting, President Xi to the Rose Garden for a signing.
Well, he tweeted many things if you look at his record.
But the fact is, the underlying dynamics for a trade deal is still there. And the last 40 years, if we really look at what happened between U.S. and China, China benefited tremendously from the U.S., and the U.S. benefited tremendously from China.
So what are you trying to say here?
What I'm trying to say is the dynamics and the underlying connectivities are still there. And even though the rhetorics are high, the words are huge, let's not forget that there's still so much interconnectivity.
There is synergy, no doubt about that. But, you know, would it really matter anymore, Mr. Zhang? Because some are concerned, you know, once politics plays a dominant role, it is very dangerous that the others will have to be deprioritized in a way. Because now there are voices in Washington getting ever bigger, or trying to get ever bigger, about that geopolitics plays a much bigger role than, you know, make sure there's sustainable economic cooperation between China and the United States, because they are saying, well, the U.S. position will be further challenged by China, and that's going to be fearful for everyone. At least that was what they were saying.
Yeah, indeed. Right now, if you look at the political atmosphere in Washington, D.C., actually, you know, they need to, you know, Trump administration still trying to provide, you know, strongest pressure on Chinese side in order to get, you know, a better interest in the future. Meanwhile, also Huawei case also shows that the U.S. didn't want to see a stronger, you know, competitors in global market in high-tech sectors. Also, my concern is that nowadays, actually, so-called decoupling issues that would be very dangerous, you know, thinking and action, because today between China and the U.S. we already linked by global supply chain, global value chain. In case that you want to, you know, decoupling. Decouple. That means, you know, who will pay, you know, so big cost in the future.
But does it matter? I mean, does it matter in politics, Mr. Shott? Who cares? I mean, politicians get re-elections. That's what they care. Whether who is going to pay for it, they're not going to pay for it. So, Mr. Shott, what Mr. Zhang, you know, the reasoning, the three of you here, beautiful, but do they matter anymore these days? I mean, we are probably not just the chit-chat talking about the reasons behind what's going on, but rather the realities here.
Well, they do matter in the sense that it is having an impact on both the U.S. and the Chinese economy and those of many of our trading partners in the region. It's having an impact on productivity. It will lead to wasted or less efficient investment, which will be a drag on growth going forward. And so it's something that both the United States and China should try to avoid. But I think the point that you made that in Washington, the clear eye is on the 2020 election, and both parties have concerns and skepticism about doing business with China. And so that's what is feeding at least some of the reactions in the White House.
Mr. Shott, another judgment I would love to hear your thought is whether the U.S., quote-unquote, the U.S., as if it's a piece, one piece, but as you may know, it's not. There are so many different interest groups and different ways of thinking. But if the U.S. or not already come to consensus about how to deal with China, that is a topic many Chinese are extremely fascinated about. Some say yes already, long time already. Others say, well, maybe not yet. What's your judgment here? Is there still a way to be able to make things happen?
I think many constituencies, many groups in the United States have a vested interest in seeing better relations with China for the very reasons that Mr. Huang and Dr. Zhang mentioned. Our economies are interrelated. We benefit from stronger ties, economic ties with each other, but we have to manage the relationship to ensure that it's sustainable. And the trade negotiations were moving in that direction. I think there's an interest in both sides, perhaps the heads of state in calling a ceasefire when hopefully they meet at the G20 meeting later this month. But the political climate in both countries is making it harder to find a way to have an agreement that is sustainable over time. And that's something that business and other groups in both countries have to work to find a solution.
Both of you, your responses, Mr.
I'd just like to emphasize on one point, that is today, if you look at China, we have a very comprehensive, completed industrial system, from low end to mid end to high end. Also, from raw material to parts to final products. So in other, if you look at other countries, there is no other country like China today. Even if in the United States, they just mainly focusing on high-tech sectors, very high value-added parts. In this case, you can find that okay, U.S. can prohibit chips to China. You may find that what type of place they can sell those chips. So that's a big problem.
So you're saying China is okay, whether you sell us or not?
No, of course, China.
Is that what you're saying?
No. China will suffer from, maybe trade diversion effect, and maybe suffering from, unemployment issues to some extent. But please pay attention that today, actually, China's economic growth rate, mainly relying on domestic demand instead of international demand.
So, Mr. Zhang, if I could be direct here, that is, do you think many Chinese still think about whether the U.S. is thinking giving China space to development or giving both to cooperate, or China has already decided, many Chinese, that no matter what happens, we're going to go our own way? What is your sense, if people watching this program coming from afar, what have the Chinese decided?
My observation,
or have they decided?
Yeah. I think that in the past 4 decades, based on quite positive, constructive relationship between China and the U.S., definitely U.S. side provided a very big space to promote both China and the U.S. development. But right now, U.S. Policy tools is too extreme, to make China's development. So that's why today, actually, not only from Chinese side, but also from other trade partners, we are not support U.S. trade policy.
Mr. Huang.
Well, first to address a point you made earlier, the economy does matter. Politicians get elected and unelected.
Well, in the long term, but what about in the short term? You got a less than.
The short term, what we're facing is this great economic conundrum. We see in the United States, the Federal Reserve has been pumping out money, yet we still have growth about 3%, unemployment at historical low about 3%, and no price inflation. No price inflation. And you can argue that's similarly happening
exactly,
in China.
In a way, posing the challenge that the short-term economic prospect is going to be good for politicians to maneuver and to manipulate even. Therefore, there could be the possibility things are getting worse before it could ever get better.
I think what happens as in a negotiation between two people is if their tactic is to punch the other person, hoping to bring the other person to the table, and it turns out that both could actually suffer each other. And so what we see is we might be at a stalemate, except with an escalation of words.
Is it tactics or already strategies, what you're seeing right now, Washington's attitude towards Beijing and China? Mr. Shott.
Well, it's hard to differentiate between the two.
Wow, there's a huge difference.
I think there are advisors in the White House. Well, yeah, but there are advisors in the White House who are giving priority to the security and defense concerns, others who are looking at the longer-term economic relationship. And I suspect that the president feels fairly comfortable that he can withstand the pain in the United States from the trade war because the economy is doing as well as Mr. Huang said. But the economy is also doing fairly well in China. There, I think the biggest challenge is how do you sustain that growth, and the Chinese need more economic reform to boost productivity. That's the drag that's the threat to the Chinese economy over time.
Yeah.
Right.
And to answer your point, the decoupling has already happened. If you're in China, you use Weibo, Weixin. If you're in the United States, you use Google, Facebook, Instagram. So on the application level, that's already happened. What we might see is the decoupling down the different levels to operating system, semiconductors, even standards.
Of course.
Now that's what I would
to the fabrics that
that's what I would worry the most. If I can't carry my my technology product and go anywhere in the world and use it anywhere in the world, that to me as a consumer would be detrimental. And that might be what's going to happen.
All right. Well, before we go, I would love to briefly invite your opinions about how do you see relationships short-term, long-term? Do we still need to think about the long-term anymore, given the daily drama, if not daily dramas, that we're seeing right now? You know, this is not a joke, but rather, you know, when we look at the world today, what should we think about it? Long-term or short-term only? Mr. Shott, I know you have a lot of serious thoughts about these questions because we were talking to each other earlier about them. Briefly, if you can, what exactly shall we look at? What kind of time frame are you looking at?
Well, I think there's going to be friction certainly through the U.S. election next in November of 2020. But thoughtful people in both countries need to give priority to the importance of working together, because the United States and China have to work together on many important international issues, including North Korea, including how to deal with Iran and avoid war in the Middle East. So these are things that the United States and China need to be working together, and hopefully that projection will continue.
I see. Dr. Zhang? Short-term,
yeah.
long-term, do we need to think about even the long-term anymore?
In short-term, we have to face with, trade friction. In the long-term, I do believe that both China and the U.S. Will have enough wisdom to seek, rational and constructive relationship.
We hope that is the case. Mr. Huang, final
Well,
words?
at the table, we have Americans and Chinese, but in the end, we're all humans. And we have issues as climate change, the advent of artificial intelligence, food security, nuclear nonproliferation.
And the list goes on.
These are human issues.
Right.
And we need the two countries to work together.
Well, I'm not sure whether the policymakers are as philosophical as you are, but for now, I want to thank the three of you for being with us. Jeffrey Shott, Zhang Jianping, Huang Zhengyi. Really appreciate the voices from both China and the United States. We need to hear both sides. Thank you so much, gentlemen. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. And have a great weekend, everyone.